On today's show, we're going through a big picture overview for the Rangers this free agency. What do they have? What do they need? And what are they going to be willing to spend? All that and more on this episode of Locked On Rangers. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Rangers, your daily Texas Rangers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are locked onto the World Series champion Texas Rangers. I'm Bryce Patrick, a cripplingly addicted Texas Rangers fan, covering this team for 11 seasons, including all 6 as the founder and host of this podcast. Thank you all so much for making Locked On Rangers your first listen every single day. If you're not already, you can follow me on Twitter at Bryce Patrick. You can follow the show at Locked On Rangers. Hit subscribe on your favorite podcasting platform and on YouTube, where the best way you can help grow the show is to comment nearly any single thing below. Now, before we get into this big picture overview of free agency, what the Rangers have to do this winter, this episode is brought to you by PrizePicks. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to win $50 instantly when you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. Now, the Rangers sit here out of the playoffs, not even being in the playoffs, about 4 days away from a incredibly annoying World Series matchup that will break in all the casuals and have people talking about how last year was so boring. But we don't care. We don't really care. We're more worried about the 2025 World Series, where hopefully the Rangers will be bouncing back and repeating Bruce Bochy's pattern of 3 World Series championships in 5 years. That's the hope. That's the goal. But where do the Rangers stand right now? What do they need to do this winter, coming off of a frankly kind of embarrassing season where they finished 78 wins and 10 wins behind the Astros for the top of the AL West? Not even a great year for the AL West, but the Rangers just could not keep pace. They could not keep up. They just didn't have it in them this year. They're going to need to add a lot this offseason. They're going to need to be smart about how they add. This is the 3rd winter of Chris Young in charge of everything, and I'm really curious to see where he goes with it. I mean, his first winter in charge was phenomenal. Perfect winter, because it set up the Rangers to win their first World Series championship coming off of a terrible 2022 season. He signs Bruce Bochy. He brings in Jacob deGrom, brings in Nathan Eovaldi, brings in Andrew Heaney, all these other different little moves under the radar that got the Rangers to be World Series contenders, and not only contenders, but winners. This was a huge turnaround. And last year, coming off of the World Series championship, there wasn't a lot that he did. Now, granted, there wasn't a whole lot that he really needed to do. I mean, the Rangers had a need for probably more starting pitching than they signed. Bringing Jordan Montgomery back was priority number 1. The Rangers couldn't end up getting that done. Looks like a smart decision on their part after the season that Jordan Montgomery had this year to not do that. They needed to address the bullpen. They signed basically 2 medium name free agents in Kirby Yates and David Robertson. Those 2 worked out really well. They signed back Jankowski, who had a terrible season. They signed a backup catcher who had an abysmal offensive season. And other than that, outside of getting the avoiding arbitration with Adolis Garcia done, that was pretty much it. And the Rangers underperformed. They based a lot of their hopes on rookies. I talked about that in a show a couple weeks ago about how the things that the Rangers, went wrong, of where they placed their hope in wrong places. Now, I think that a lot of these guys will have bounce back season, but what do the Rangers actually need at this point? They're in still kind of a weird place where last year, when you looked at the offense, you said these guys are all locked up for a while. There's not really any place for the Rangers to go and look to make some big signing. That maybe they could have signed a DH last year if they weren't really sure Wyatt Langford was going to be ready for every day. Right now, they're in a similar situation in that there's not really a whole lot of places at this moment where the Rangers could get a massive upgrade. Maybe you still look at DH. Maybe you look at one of the corner outfield spots if, Adolis Garcia moves to more of a DH role. And, I mean, who knows what's going to happen with who's playing the outfield at this point. It's kind of anybody's guess. But right now, the first thing the Rangers need to look at is starting pitchers. I think they need to sign maybe 1 to 2 starting pitchers this offseason. Last week I did 3 different shows talking about, I think, 15 total different starting pitchers that are going to be on the market. The Rangers could go and prioritize whether they want to go and take a big swing for somebody at the top of the free agent market, like one of those aces that I mentioned, whether it's Corbin Burns, whether it is Blake Snell or Max Fried, or one of the guys of that ilk. I think that could be a smart way to go about it. It might be the best way to go about it. But in terms of what their starting rotation looks like next year, there's not a whole lot of guys you could feel very confident are going to get you 30 starts or even 150 innings. They've got 6-7 guys that I think will play a role that I feel confident in being in the mix. Leiter is kind of that borderline. I'm not quite sure he's ready for an everyday rotation role. I think he's getting close. I think he was better than his numbers indicate this year. He definitely made some significant progress, but I'm still, if this team is going to contend for a World Series in 2025, like they say they are and say they want to, then I don't know how good you feel about Leiter being a major part of that rotation. Maybe he proves me wrong. Still got plenty of upside left in him and showed some really brilliant flashes last year. But I mean, your 1 through 5 is all guys that are coming off of, most of them are coming off of major surgeries or significant injuries this year. I mean, you've got Jacob deGrom as your top guy. You have Cody Bradford, who missed a decent chunk of this season. You've got Tyler Mahle, who barely pitched at all this year. Then you have Kumar Rocker, who I think is going to be very good next year, but in terms of the amount of starts and innings that he's allowed to pitch next year, coming off of his, it'll be his first full season back from Tommy John surgery, I'm not sure how much you can bank on that. And then you also have John Gray, who has spent so much time on the IL the last couple of years. He's been a big part of the rotation the last 3 seasons, but in terms of his overall health and effectiveness, he's coming off a 4.5 ERA season where he only pitched 102 innings. It's not a great year for Gray, who I think was underrated for the first 2 years of his contract here, and then maybe a little overrated. Not a huge part of the Rangers succeeding last year. So some depth in the rotation, just 1 or 2 guys you feel comfortable that could give you 100 to 150 innings. Maybe you want to go get one guy that gets you 180 to 200 innings. There's not a whole lot of guys like that in baseball nowadays, unfortunately. But I think just some assurances, some steadiness in that rotation. I mean, if everything goes right with that rotation, or even most things go right, it could be a pretty darn good one. But just a little bit more depth, whether that's bringing back an Eovaldi and signing one more guy or whatever it looks like. I think 1 to 2 starting pitchers is about what they need. Now, the biggest need, the most help they're going to need is in their bullpen with the leverage guys, leverage arms at the back end of the pen. Because right now, the only guy that I feel really confident in saying is going to be a competent leverage relief arm in the back of the Rangers pen is Josh Sborz. And their 7th, 8th, and 9th inning guys are all free agents: Yates, Robertson, and Leclerc. Well, Robertson does have an option, a mutual option. I'm not sure if he's going to pick that up. I'm not sure if he's going to retire. I think that if he is a free agent, if he does just go the straight free agency route, the Rangers will want to bring him back. Same with Yates. Not quite sure about Leclerc. I would think they'd be open to that, coming off of the worst year he's had in quite some time, but was an integral part of that bullpen in 2023. I think was a lot better than people gave him credit for the last 3 years, but still not coming off of a great season. The Rangers need quite a few guys in the back end of the pen. I'd say probably 2 to 3 leverage relievers, if I'm being honest, maybe leaning more towards 3 to 4, because Sborz is also coming off of a very injury-plagued season. So even though he is, he is at this moment the most trusted guy in that pen that is for sure going to be back next year. Banking on him, or banking on really any one reliever to save you, is kind of difficult. And then the last couple of things this Rangers team needs is sign a backup catcher. Not all that exciting. And I think one medium to big-ish size bat, somebody to come in and play DH, or maybe someone to come play a corner outfield spot. I think I feel pretty confident in saying that Adolis Garcia and Wyatt Langford are going to be everyday players next year, and they can get 130 to 160 games out of each of them. But in terms of who that third outfielder or everyday DH is, I'm not entirely sure. Maybe Leody Taveras hasn't lost his everyday spot, and Wyatt is playing right field, Adolis is DHing, and Evan Carter's in left. But again, the health of Evan Carter is not something that I think the Rangers can super bank on next year. I'm hoping that I'm wrong, very much hoping that I'm wrong. But in terms of just shoring themselves up and just adding back to this offense that, pretty much everyone across the board had what they would consider a disappointing offensive season outside of Josh Smith. And even the second half, Josh Smith might say he was disappointed in his production. So getting one bat, banking on some of that offensive regression in the positive way from the young guys like Carter, like Langford, like Young, and maybe a bounce back from Jonah Heim, as well as basically everybody else on this roster. But adding one more bat that you feel pretty darn good about in free agency might just be the move. Coming up, we'll look at how much the Rangers have to spend, what they're spending on next year, and if this team really can't afford to be as aggressive at the top of the market as they've been in years past. Right after this word for our sponsors. The show is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is the best place to get in on the sports money action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in award winnings, PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. PrizePicks is the best way to get in the action on sports in over 30 states across the country, including California, Florida, Georgia, and Texas. PrizePicks puts its members first, so all withdrawals are fast, safe, and secure. When my pick hits, I can get my money in as quick as 15 minutes. So download the app today. Use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Download the app today and use code LOCKEDONMLB to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks. Run your game. Now, let's get into the money and the numbers. Where do the Rangers stand? How much do they have to spend this offseason? Well, they're in a pretty decent spot right now. According to SpotTrack, what they have as of right now is about $171 million on the books, basically guaranteed for next year. Now, that includes basically it does include every single option that's available to them, including the $20 million player option for Nathan Eovaldi, including the $7 million mutual option for David Robertson, and the $6.5 million team option for Andrew Chafin that I am 99% confident is not going to be picked up this offseason. Now, what does that not include? It doesn't include the Rangers' arbitration salaries, which totals up to about $30 million. The highest of which is going to be Nathaniel Lowe, who's projected to make 10.7 mil in his final year of arbitration. And then actually third year, he might have one more year as a Super 2 guy. Josh S'mores is the lowest at $1.5 million. So it's about $30 million. So we're sitting at around $200 million on the payroll, and then you add the rest of the roster to be filled out with pre-arbitration guys, all making about $800,000. That's $8.8 million. So in total, right now, the Rangers are projected to have a payroll of $209.8 million, give or take. Right now, they have approximately $93 million in tax base. I don't think that includes the arbitration salary. So you take out about $30 million for that. You take out about $8 to $9 million for the pre-arbitration salaries. And that leaves the Rangers with about $55-ish million, give or take, to play with in free agency before they hit that luxury tax. Now, could the Rangers go into the luxury tax, go over the luxury tax, and, to be competitors, to get back to that World Series championship? Absolutely. Should they? Absolutely. This is the team that just had so much momentum after 2023, so much momentum heading into 2024 as, the first major DFW sports team to win a championship in 12 years. They had all this love, all this bandwagon energy, and they spoiled a lot of it. They spoiled so much of it this year by pooping the bed, by having a terrible, terrible season. And if the Rangers want to be that team, be, the team in DFW, or at least, the third or second most popular team in their own market, because I don't think anyone is passing the Cowboys, unfortunately, if they want to engender that support, if they want to keep that momentum, if they want to keep being a team that is a legitimate contender year in and year out, So investment is needed. More investment is needed. You're going to need to be in that luxury tax more often than not. But the Rangers have been in it 2 years in a row. There is still some question about exactly what they're doing with their TV deal. But now that they have officially decided to part ways with Bally Sports, which is now FanDuel Sports, which has, I think, like 3 or 4 actual teams left, they're going to have a better picture of how much they should be making, how much they're going to be in charge of with all of that TV deal, whether they're going one of the 3 different routes that I talked about in the show a couple weeks ago, whether they're wanting to go with just a streaming app, whether they're wanting to go with a local TV deal partner with WFAA, something like or Tegna, something like what the Dallas Mavericks are doing this year, or they're going to want to make their own regional sports network. Bottom line is they'll have a better picture of what their finances are going to be, and theoretically feel more comfortable investing in the long term, in the payroll, in the whatever else they already invested in the stadium and all of those nice things. They invested in Chris Young, keeping him around on a multi-year deal for probably 5 years. I think that is the projection. They didn't say exactly how long the deal was, but they're keeping their young, talented GM who won them their first championship ever around. And so hopefully he will be allowed to spend more at the top end of the market. But are they going to invest this year? Are they going to get right up there around the luxury tax? Well, once you become repeat offenders, the Rangers have been in the luxury tax the last 2 years. If they get into it a third year, then it starts to put them into the more penalized zone. So I think that they're probably going to try and do not everything in their power to stay out of the luxury tax, but get at least like spend in the middle range of this market. Maybe they're not going to spend the full $55 million and bump right up against that wall for the luxury tax and become the three-peat offenders. But there's still plenty of room to play at the middle of this market, or heck, even be aggressive at some of the guys at the top end of the market and trust your own internal depth to, get you there, to get you to bounce back. Because this team's going to need to be about 10 to 15 wins better. I mean, they finished with 78 wins, but their Pythagorean record had them at 75 wins. They were unfortunately really good at one-run games for no reason this year. I wish they could have been better at one-run games last year. Maybe give themselves a little bit more oomph. Maybe win that AL West, and maybe things go differently. It doesn't particularly matter. But this team needs a lot of improvement. I mean, I think there's a lot that the Rangers can bank on of these guys not all having some of the worst seasons of their career offensively, like Jonah Heim and Simeon. Lowe had a solid year, but not great. Tavares was pretty bad this year. Adolis, this was by far his worst year as an everyday player since 2021. This was bad. And the Rangers didn't have as much depth as they thought to fill it. I mean, this was a super injury-plagued year from Josh Young and Evan Carter, 2 guys who the Rangers thought would be big parts of this team. And even though the pitching staff was better than expected, I mean, there was a lot of negativity and, there was not a whole lot of optimism about what this starting rotation could do before the likes of Scherzer and Malley and DeGrom got back. But they held their own for the most part. Lorenzen was really solid. Cody Bradford was incredible. Nathan Eovaldi was about what you'd expect. Heaney was, I think, better than most people give him credit for. He was very, very solid for this team. And Gray had his moments as well as Dane Dunning. But overall, this team just was not good enough, and they're going to need a lot of improvement, whether that comes from banking on guys internally, getting that much better, or whether this team is going to be top-end players at the top of the market. We'll have yet to see. I think adding someone of that superstar ilk, getting the Rangers back in there of being one of the flashy teams in free agency, and not just flashy, but also spending wisely. Coming up, we're going to talk about what makes the smartest investment in free agency, why the Rangers should be players for one of those big fish at the top of the market, if not at least in the conversation for all of them, right after this word from our sponsors. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Now they've got odds right now on the World Series. According to FanDuel, Los Angeles Dodgers are the favorites at -128. The Yankees are the least favorites at the underdogs. I don't know, the least favorite. We're going to go back to that because calling the Yankees an underdog at +108, still not a whole lot of underdogginess in them. They've also got odds for the World Series MVP. Shohei Ohtani is the favorite right now at +220, then Aaron Judge +490, and Juan Soto at +550. You can check out all the odds. Go visit FanDuel.com and download America's #1 sportsbook. Now, what makes a smart free agent investment? So far, the Rangers during Chris Young's tenure, for the most part, have spent very, very well. There was a lot of talk about how much they're spending and how aggressive the Rangers were in free agency years back. But really, even with signing those big deals for Seager, for Simeon, for DeGrom, I mean, especially the Seager and Simeon deals. I mean, that offseason, the Rangers' payroll was not anywhere near where it should have been. It was in the middle to bottom of baseball. They were about a middle to bottom team in Major League Baseball in terms of talent and what they were producing on the field. But getting those guys, having the room to sign a Seager and a Simeon, I mean, it didn't vault the Rangers into the Yankee or Met or Dodger payroll type of stratosphere. It just kind of launched them back into about where they should be. And so far on all of these big deals, or all the biggest deals that the Rangers have signed, so far for the most part, they have been incredibly successful. I mean, Seager and Simeon finishing 2-3 at MVP voting and powering you to your first ever World Series championship, and Seager winning World Series MVP. That's a smart investment. Both of those guys having at least 4-win seasons. I think actually Seager might have been around 3.5 his first year in Texas, where he set a career high in home runs, was an all-star all 3 seasons in Texas, and has been a World Series MVP. No matter how the rest of that contract ages, eventually it's going to age poorly because that's just how those contracts do. Whether it's Simeon or Seager, eventually those guys are going to stop being worth $40 million or $25 to $30 million a year that they're earning. But they got to make it worth it on the front end. And they have so far. Jacob DeGrom, not really as much of a super successful signing at this point. Gave the Rangers 6 pretty darn good starts in 2023. Gave them, 4 starts at the back end of this year in the major leagues. I think it was 3 starts after rehabbing from Tommy John surgery, missing the vast majority of last season and this season. But he should be ready to hopefully give you an ace workload, ace caliber pitcher. When he's been on the mound, he's been incredible. But that was a risky contract when the Rangers signed it. They knew it. It was worth the risk because without him, without those 6 starts, I'm not sure the Rangers do make the playoffs in 2023 and therefore do not win the World Series. So, I mean, it's easy to look at these and say, just blanket statement, the Rangers won a World Series, so every single contract is successful. But you go through all of them. John Gray making around, $15 million a year for a 4-year deal. He's been pretty much worth that. I mean, what they got out of Andrew Heaney the last couple of years, it was seeming like a little bit of a risky contract given Andrew Heaney's lack of durability. And then signing Eovaldi after they missed, it seemed like it was because they missed out on signing a bat like Conforto or whoever else they were looking for to add to left field or whatever. They signed Nathan Eovaldi to a 2-year deal with an option for a 2-year deal with an option for a 3rd year and with a lot of incentives. And he lives up to it and then some, and is your ace, is an all-star last year, does pitch you incredibly well in the entire postseason. And without Nathan Eovaldi, there is no way in heck the Rangers win that World Series last year. And without what Nathan Eovaldi did in the regular season, there is no way in heck that the Rangers even make the playoffs last season. And even though the Rangers disappointed in a big, big way this year, he still very much lived up to that contract. And if he ends up picking up that option for next year, that is a super, super bargain deal that the Rangers signed him to. Malley, we have yet to see if that's going to work out pretty well. But of the two big free agents the Rangers signed last year, they didn't do a whole lot in free agency. But the two big guys that they did sign in Robertson and Yates, they said, hey, we got to fix our bullpen. Let's go sign these two guys and, also add a Jose Urena, and that should do it. And it pretty much did. He's been very, very impressive, having a very high hit rate on these contracts signed. Now, obviously, the DeGrom deal has the potential to look very, very bad, depending on how DeGrom pitches, how often he pitches this year, and not only this year, but next year and the year after that. But that was always a risky signing that seemed worth it. And if that's the one that you really miss out on, the rest of these contracts have been all a really, really high hit rate. I feel very confident in Chris Young's ability to take whatever resources he's given. I'm hoping he's given a lot of resources this offseason to go and bounce back, because ultimately a lot of this ends up coming down to ownership and how much they're willing to invest and what their mindset is after this past season. Now, I know that Ray Davis is a competitive guy, is a guy who has said publicly of how much he cares about this team and how much he understands fans just wanting to spend all the money in the world, which he's like, if it was not my checkbook, then I would want ownership to spend too. But still, it depends, I think, a lot on how Ray Davis and the rest of this ownership group took this past season. Did it piss them off? Did it make them angry? Did it make them want to never see a season like this again? Say, okay, maybe we should have invested a little bit more this past offseason coming off of a championship. Maybe we should have done some things a little bit differently. Maybe we should have brought back Montgomery or signed a big bat or whatever it was. Then I think this team will be set up for much more long-term success. But in terms of the guys you spend for at the top end of the market, you spend for those super duper stars. You spend for top end, top of the rotation pitchers like a Jacob deGrom, like a Nathan Eovaldi. You sign guys like Seager and Semien. I mean, the guys who are making the big money, guys like Wheeler, guys like Judge, guys like Shohei Ohtani. Those are the guys that you go all in for and that are pretty routinely worth it. And there are quite a few guys at the top end of this market that I think the Rangers could go be aggressive for. Whether it is, Juan Soto, I think it's very unlikely that the Rangers do get Juan Soto, but they're definitely going to be, I think, at least in the conversation. Soto's going to be entertaining a lot of offers. I think it's very, very likely he ends up with the Yankees, not due to any inside knowledge, but just especially the Yankees getting to the World Series, especially if they win it, super especially if he wins World Series MVP. I think they're going to cash just an unreasonably big check. But the Rangers have signed top priority free agents. I mean, there were a lot of guys that were in on Corey Seager. There were a lot of guys that were in on Marcus Semien back when the Rangers signed both of them. And to be able to convince those two that this was the franchise for them, this was a good place to be moving forward, coming off of a 100-loss season. An incredibly impressive job from him to be able to come off of a 95-loss season with those two new superstars, with this new era, and be able to convince Bruce Bochy and Jacob deGrom to come and sign here, come be part of the Texas Rangers after that 2022 season. Is an incredibly high rate of success, incredibly confident that Chris Young can convince just about anybody to come sign here. Now, it just depends on the resources that he's allocated, and he's not going to be able to convince literally anybody to sign here, but I think that he's definitely got one of the highest edges of anybody in terms of just GMs and ability to, show free agents his vision, show them his plan, and now have proof of concept as well with the World Series in basically year zero of the competitive window. Say, hey, look, we've still got a lot of really, really good guys here. Yeah, this past season didn't go exactly as we wanted it to, but there's a lot of reason for optimism, whether it's, Seager and Simeon being those superstars, whether it's Wyatt Langford and how freaking good he can be, whether it's Rocker breaking out at the end of this year and saying, yeah, we're going to have Kumar Rocker, we're going to have Cody Bradford, and we're going to have Jacob deGrom at the top end of this rotation, not to mention whatever Tyler Mahle can give us. There's a lot of reason for him to be able to convince not only free agents, but hopefully also this fan base that, hey, this is the team that can bounce back and hopefully will bounce back. And I anticipate this team being aggressive when it comes to those top end ace pitchers on the market. I don't think they're going to be super aggressive on very many hitters outside of probably just Juan Soto, because if you want to consider yourself a competing team, you got to at least kick the tires, make an offer to Juan Soto. But of those starting pitchers that I mentioned in last week's show, talking about the Corbin Burns, the Max Fried, the Blake Snells of the world, this team needs to be at the top end of that market. And if they can get one of those guys or just bring back their guys, no matter what the plan is, I feel very confident in Chris Young having a good offseason, but it needs to be a very big offseason, because as much as I'm a believer that last year was a little bit fluky, this team still has a long way to go to get back to that World Series, to hopefully bring another championship back to Texas. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank y'all so much for listening and subscribing. And until next time, don't forget to enjoy World Series champion Texas Rangers baseball.